All right. Hi, everyone. It's Sir Rithkin and Ontier, and I'm here with my guest host, Sir Bryn, who's also from Ontier. And we're here to interview Duke Kjartan, who is also from Ontier. So you have an all Ontier panel today. This is part of my interview with the Duke series, and I'm excited to talk to Kjartan because we've known each other a long time, but I don't know his whole story, and that'll be cool to know. So you've watched some of these. We usually just start with your origin story. So you wanted to start with your origin story?
Sure. My origin story is before I have a memory, my parents told me that wherever we went, where there was a stick, I picked it up and I had a sword. And when I was a kid, it was going out and using my sword, carving them down, whittling them down. I had a pocket knife and a benign, negligent childhood. So we'd wander off in the woods. I'd take a knife and cut it into a blade and whack at trees and, big weeds and cut them up. And, and that was it. There was always something about that. I wasn't a big play army guy, but that was always something that was in my thing. Both my parents had an extensive library, and I'm not sure which one of them it was, but they had a lot of mythology and history stuff in our library. So as far back as I can remember, I was cramming through Roman and Greek and Hindu and all of that stuff. And, and that leads into kind of some prehistoric stuff like that. But, Gilgamesh, right? And that story is, that's the journey of knighthood and that kind of stuff. And that was always what it was. Picked up Lord of the Rings when I was 10, read those. I have kind of a love-hate situation with those movies because they were so well done. But because my kids saw the movies when they were young, they have no interest in reading the books. And so it's kind of a toss-up with that. I first ran into the SCA. I think I was 14 or 15, and there was a demo at our local county fairgrounds. And it was like a paddock or a small horse section that they were fighting in. And they did the fighting stuff, and I'm like, hey, Dad, I want to do this. And then they did kind of a meet and greet, and we walked up, and my dad, like, I'm 6'2" now. I was like 5'6" at the time. My dad's 5'8", 5'9" right now. Oddly enough, my father's not the tall part of my family. But we go up to this guy. He's 6'4", 260, 280 pounds, just dressed down in a full-length chainmail outfit with a round shield and an axe. And just the complete Viking. He pulls his helmet off. He's got the big black beard. And if you're familiar with the West Coast at all, the guy I'm talking about is Master Grendel, right? Who was the first member of the Order of Chivalry I ever met. And a big part of, the fact that when I came back, he was still there, and just a fantastic guy. Let me know you can be as into this as you want and do all this stuff and still be a great big sweetheart and dork at the same time. Master Grendel is one of my favorite people I've ever met, and one of the reasons why I came back to try this, a few years later. But he had this axe that was it was just short, and it was a hand axe, and he hands it to me, and this thing's like 4 pounds. I'm like, wow, this is really heavy for what you guys do. He's like, yeah, it could be lighter. And I pass it over to my father, who I've been telling, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. He takes his axe, he looks at Grendel, he looks at me, and right in front of everybody goes, you want to do this with these people? You're nuts. And he's never changed his opinion on that. But that was the first time I found it. And then things came around, and we weren't super well off financially, but we could do stuff, and I'd had a scholarship to a local private school, so it sent me across the river into Portland quite a bit. And every year, the local group at Three Mountains did a demo at OMSI. And so I would come back annually to that demo so I could see these guys again. I had no idea how to get into it, no ability to, like, get in and do that, but I could see it, and that kept my interest into it. And I know that I met Duke Kjartan at one of those, and he was super gracious and super nice to a teenage kid that seemed interested, that didn't look like he was going to ever show back up, but a super fantastic guy. And then I graduated high school, went to community college, and one of the guys in one of my classes was in it. And it turns out he was like Master Grendel's proto squire at the time. And he brought me over to the house, and I just got into a group of like-minded 20-year-olds that had some affiliation, and we prepped up for it. And I got in a group of people, and there was this really massive Memorial Day weekend event just a couple hours south of us called Eggles Tourney. And so there's about half of us are in our mid 20s. I'm 20. There's about 3 of us that are 20. We go down there and I set up my dome tent, whatever, put on this is 96. So I put on my kilt because Braveheart had just come out. I decided that I wasn't gonna be Scottish. I was gonna be Irish because that was original and unique. But put on that kilt of mine, and it was more of like just the kilt with the pleats in it, and then I had like a 14th century like white blouse that went out. It was just loaner hand-me-down garb, and went out and wandered around, and people were nice. People, gave me a beer here and there. Had a good time, standing around the campfires. There's something about that first event, especially when it's big like that. That suspension of disbelief goes away, right? And you're just boom right into that fantasy story you've always told yourself, right? That it's that D&D role playing, the stuff that you've always visualized before there was really good visualization. You're just in it, and it's behind you, and it's in front of you, and there's drums that you can hear in the distance. And I was super excited to see the fighting the next day. But I was having so much fun, I didn't want the fun to stop. So I rolled back into camp, and rolled back into camp underage, unfortunately, just right before dawn. And turns out that I wasn't the only one in our group that was under 21 drinking. But I was just the one that wasn't caught, and that we were all told by the people running the event that that it was time to pack our stuff up and leave because drinking underage wasn't allowed. All right. So my first real event did set the tone for my drinking for the rest of my career, but it wasn't super auspicious. But and the guy that was kind of the one that was integrated in the stuff, he got chewed on a little bit by some local people, and said, all right, we're going to be allowed to try this again. There's an event right here in my hometown, 7 miles from my house at the time. And it's this big thing that's never been done before. And there's going to be people from all sorts of different kingdoms and all sorts of stuff. And they're going to take over the Clark County Fairgrounds again. And it's like 8 days. And so my first real event was 30 year. And that event was, I was working a swing shift at the time. So my time at that event was, I would do stuff at the event all day, leave at 11 o'clock, go take a shower, work from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and come back, take a nap, and then do the event for the rest of the event. And that was like 3 or 4 weeks after after Eggles. But and 3 of the guys in our group fought, and that's why I wanted to do this, right? Was to do the fighting. I was going to be so good, man. 2 swords. I had a whole armor idea in the back of my head right out of one of the D&D books that I had. I mean, it was all of that. I think everybody thinks that they're going to be a 2-sword fighter the first time they fight, because mid 90s, there's certain things in in that era that are a big deal with that. But I didn't have any armor. And they said, hey, we know this guy that owns a machine shop, and he can help you out getting some of this stuff together. And worst case scenario, we'll figure out what else you need to do. And so I go down to this guy's shop every day after work, and he cut the patterns. He showed me what to do. He more than generous with his time and his energy, and he used his welder, and had me hammer out a helmet and knee cups and elbow cups. Showed me how to make plastic pickleball armor. I think I had enough money to scrabble up for a gorget and a demi. I don't remember what I did for my basket for my shield hand. But in the 3 weeks between that Eagles and that 30 year, I cobbled up the ugliest set of armor, and it was on the field at 30th year for the first time ever. And we were in this little 10-man tournament Army thing, and we go running at the other line, and I remember it bone chilling today. I'm in the middle of this thing, and I'm smashed up against this guy who's 40, 50 pounds heavier than I am. I cut my nose on the brim of my helmet because I didn't pad it properly. But all around me, it was that metal on metal grind and clank and just carnage. And all of a sudden, the only way I can describe it is I felt like I was in the middle of a train wreck, right? Of just that grinding and cracking and smashing and snapping. I was dead right off the bat. So I wander off and I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this again. I'm never going to stop doing this. I want to chase that feeling for the rest of my life. And that's it. That was it for my desire to be involved in the SCA.
Who was the person that helped you get your armor together?
Later. That's
all right.
That's another story.
We'll talk about it later.
He's a guy that he's played at the edges for years and years. He's had lots of stuff kick him up and down in life, run businesses, had stuff, sold them, done stuff. His name is Joe. He goes by Joe in the SCA. 20 years later, when we were stepping up, I found out that he didn't have an AOA.
Oh, wow.
And that's the first piece of business that we got to do. And
that's super cool. Like, yeah. Not that he didn't have it for that long, but that you got to remedy it.
No, you're going to ask me later what's my favorite thing. That's my favorite thing ever, is the guy that bashed me in the helmet. And I'm talking, this helmet is the ugliest helmet ever. It's disappeared because it was so offensive. I hammered on it with a ball peen hammer until it was time to weld it together so it would be cool enough to use at the event. And he's like, you really need to keep plenishing this thing. Maybe we'll find it. I'm like, no, put this one. So you can see like 2-pound hammer marks. It was lumpy, right? It was just the most disgusting, ugly helmet ever. But I made it, and I got it in, and I got the fight in it, and I hurt myself the first time I fought in it. And so we fixed that. But so and I know 30 years is a really important event to a lot of people, in terms of who they want to be. There's a lot of people that I've watched on this video thing saying, you know, man, that was the event. I got to meet all these people from everywhere, and that kicked off whatever for me. I didn't nobody. I was nobody. I slept in my car a couple nights. But yeah, 30 years is the one that kicked it off for me. It was 7 miles from my house. I would go home to shower, and I would go to work. And the rest of the time, I stayed at that event site, with like 2 sets of garb that I would wash, kind of. But I was 20, so I mean.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing about my drive. So the fighting was it for me. The fighting is the reason I've been in the entire time. I've done other stuff. I've done a lot of all the other things that you got to do, but it was all in support of the fighting. It was all of that. Halfway through that event, several days into the event, I wander into this tent and they're showing videos of the first event, like up against, like projected against the wall on this tent. And, this guy, oh yeah, that guy started the SC. Oh, I don't know. Right. But that guy started the SC. He's one of the first guys and he's giving a speech on this. Okay, cool. But I got to go watch all the fighting. I didn't understand a thing of it, but I got to do that. And then we went to court. And this guy with a pink mohawk rolls out, right? All right, I thought it was cool. And everybody's like, oh yeah, he's a great guy. And this, and then His Majesty Thorin, who was just majestic, right? Comes out. Now I don't remember a lot of court because my attention span is like this, but
well, you didn't know what was going on either, right?
I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what the point of court was. I didn't understand what it had to do with me. I didn't understand any of that. And then Fiach got knighted. And I went, oh, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And I said it out loud. Oh, I want to do that. And people, oh, you can't talk about wanting to be knighted. That's not how it works around here. I'm like, no, I want that part, but I also want that part, right? It was, I got right away what the oath up and down was, because that stuff, that's when what the SCA and all the history and the mythology and all that stuff, that's what connected it together for me, right? And this simultaneously thing where there's these people speaking about Fiach, he's getting knighted, there's a buffet, there's a king giving the buffet, and that relationship, right, with all the Arthurian stuff I'd been part of, I looked into, and all of this stuff. I want that, and the king is the best, and that's kind of what I want to do, and I definitely want to do Fiach. Now it took 96, I think, like 2 years ago, I finally admitted to Fiach that I can't speak without becoming a spaz in front of him. I can't interact with him at an irrational or normal level. And he's like, it's okay. And there are plenty of times where he's come up to me and tried to be super cool to me and do stuff. And I just go, that, and lost it. Luckily, when he wrote my knighting ceremony, which is another, oh my God, thing that guy chose to do for me, somebody else was able to go, yes, right? And even I think I would have screwed that conversation up, right? Especially because he didn't know at the time that that's what started me on the path, right? And that's what locked me, is absolutely 30 year.
Did you do any other fighting at 30th year besides the wars? Like, did you do any like tournaments?
There was no tourney fighting for me. My authorization was implied and on the spot a lot. I didn't have a card. There was no pre-registering for things, and I watched a number of them, right? But the war fighting was a blast for me, and that was enough. And a lot of those tourneys started at 10 or 11, right? Or the signups, and that's when I'm rolling on the site getting off work.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that stuff that happened after the fact. I just didn't get to do a lot of that, but I would get there in time to watch them. So,
did you meet anybody there to hook up with for fight practices?
Well, that's yes and no. I had a friend that we got together at that time, and there was a practice at like the YMCA in Portland that we'd go to. And so the first like 4 or 5 months, we were able to get to practice maybe once a month, just because work schedules and life and stuff like that. And then he moved away, and the other guys I was with in that group, They only wanted to war fight. They would rather talk about going to Autumn War and all this stuff that they were going to do to get ready to go to Autumn War or the local event or whatever, than go to practice and train. And it was super frustrating. And because of the type of person I am, unless I know somebody pretty well, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to be a spaz the first time I interact with them. So I'm really careful not to like interact without. So I gotta like get comfortable knowing where other people are before I can interact with them comfortably. And that's still me today. I've just luckily been around long enough to meet enough people that I'm not a constant train wreck.
So Viscount Liam asks, how did you manage to be his house Carl without talking to him? Were you Fioc's house Carl?
I was never Fioc's house Carl.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
No, okay. I was never Fioc's house Carl. I would. Now, yeah, I don't know. That wasn't a thing. I think that maybe I was square to him for a day one time. Okay. He came down to, and this is back when I was Ian. So I would say from 96 to 99, I did intermittent, 98 or so, I did intermittent. Maybe I'd hit a practice. I certainly didn't hit my local hometown practice. And then my buddy moved away. He joined the service. And then I realized I had to go meet people. And so I started going to events and I started going to practices, and I met Tiernan right after he'd gotten knighted. And so, and it was like literally at our local practice, it was Grendel and Tiernan that were the active guys. And Tiernan had his friends from high school. And so getting into that circle was super hard. But Tiernan's a great guy. And so that was feeling out that relationship for a while. I saw his video about how me getting to be his squire was awful. And it was every bit as awful as he said.
That was not my takeaway.
Oh, that was all him, right? No, he has no problem throwing me under the bus or in front of the bus or through the bus whenever it is convenient for him. That's my night. But around that time when I just met Tiernan, we had a local, we weren't a barony then, we were a shire. So we had a defenders tournament, and Fioc was at that tournament. And I'm fighting in this tournament. I think that's where I met Earl Edward Ian Anderson. I know Tiernan was there. I know Fioc was there. But I go to fight Fioc, and he's like, "You're left-handed. You know you shouldn't fight left-handed. Fighting left-handed is bad." I'm like, I don't know what to do about that. I already told you how big this guy is in my personal mental space. I choked out the rest of that tournament, went home, switched my sword up, switched my gear up. I never fought left-handed again.
Does he know this?
Yes. He does now.
Yeah.
So that's why you don't fight left-handed? It's all Fioc?
No. I actually thought about it because I was hurt, but nobody else in my local practice was left-handed. When I would try to break down people about how to fight, they'd be like, "Well, you're left-handed. You just throw a bunch of wraps, right? Don't worry about offs. Don't worry about flat snaps. They're not going to work. Just do this stuff." And there was no real training for that. And I also went, okay, so that's a thing. And that goes right back to stuff I read about sinister fighters and a bias against them. I'm like, all right, well, we can live that out. And I did that. And I figured also he was probably right. And the expectation was that guys could show you how to throw shots if you fight right-handed. And I had nothing going on for me in those first early years, other than kind of an understanding of range through footwork. Like that's what got me from getting just molested as a junior fighter, was my ability to go, oh, I'm in a bad spot. I need to run away now. And I can run away really fast backwards. So
I have to ask you, why did you abandon your plan to fight Tusik?
Yeah.
So I told you guys that I made a helmet, a gorget, wrist armor, wrist protection, knee cups, and elbow cups. Well, after about 6 months of getting blasted in the thigh, shield started making more sense.
Okay.
Right. And it wasn't just like one leg, it was both. And so that was a shield went and at that time I was an apprentice carpenter, and it was cheaper to buy. It was cheaper to sneak home a scrap of plywood than it was to buy a piece of rattan. So, and like I said, dirt poor. I drove a car that, was held together with like hanger wire.
Did you start off as a round shield fighter, or have you been a round shield fighter your entire career?
I started round. That was definitely the big rage mid 90s. That was Grendel was doing it. Torgal had kind of made it famous. No, and the Viking, like, very early on, came to understand this was a kind of the heroes of this kingdom were Vikings. And a round shield was easy to make. It didn't require any hardware. I fought with basically everything except the winkle. I fought with heaters. I fought with squares. I fought with ovals. I fought with rectangles, teardrops. I just come back to the round shield. There are a number of very specific natural points. I think that my size and build is designed for a round shield. I know that if I throw my thumb on my hip bone, then my leg is covered. My knee is covered. I know that if I bring my hand to my shoulder point, like, I have these natural instinctive points that I know do a lot of things because of that. If I was 4 inches taller, the round shield probably would not have been something I went with. I would have probably gone for a Scudam style. But and I prefer center grip shields because they make me feel more active and more present in the fight than any kind of strap shields.
Interesting. Okay. Do you so you strike me as the kind of guy that is very analytical with how you think and how you approach stuff. Is that or is it like, or do you just define it down to like, I can touch these spots sort of thing? Like, is that how you think about fighting, or do you break it down more?
That is how I think about fighting, but that had to be self-taught. I get squared to Tiernan. He's a newish knight. I think that he'd been a knight for just over a year when he took me as a squire. And we had a long, I think I asked him at 12th night, after asking one of his best friends from high school if Todd liked me. It was like the halting, maybe whatever. And that turn around when I got my first squire, it was the exact same awful mess. Michelle Shea was basically like a marriage broker for me and Ethan. Yes, he likes you. Like, hey, do you think Ethan likes me? Do you think he'd be my square? I don't know. Ask him. Well, I can't. Right. I mean, and then Ethan doing the same thing to her until she's just like sat us down in a room and said, don't leave until you figure this out. But my first several years of fighting, so 96 to 99, there wasn't any real direction. It was, hey, how do I get better? Well, suck less is literally what my guy told me. Because, and a part of it goes to the way he fights. The best advice I ever got from him was right off the bat, though. He's like, look, you're new. You're not good, right? You're not good. You're brand new. If you don't fight well, dress well, right? Have a good presence. Take some pride in your equipment early on. Make good-looking gear. Get that stuff up to snuff. And then these guys that are super good will be more rewarded by believing that they're investing their time in someone who's shown up saying he's committed, right? And that was the best advice I've ever gotten about that. And that certainly served me through a lot of stuff for a long time. But the first 4 years of the SCA it was 100% fighting. It was, I will go to an event, fight, get drunk, go home, right? And everything else it was all about me. It was all about me. It wasn't even me being on a path because I didn't understand that I wasn't on that path, right? It's certainly at that time it was, well, I know that there's a lot of like PLQs that I've got to work on, but right now, me and my friends had this little jargon about fighting, and there's really the good guys, right? And then there's the guys that are probably being looked at to be elevated up there. And then there's all these bugs, right? And all these people that do only go out twice a year and go to wars or go to big events and do stuff. And we considered ourselves not anywhere being looked at, but we were better than the bugs. So we considered ourselves super bugs. And that's where we were. But it was also very self-fulfilling at that, because I was not ever in those first 4 years receptive to I probably just never stood still long enough, but I wasn't really good at getting advice or hearing advice, or when someone would talk to me, I wouldn't understand what they were saying. All I knew is that I was the senior squire. Tiernan had taken new squire, and all of a sudden the new squire was the good squire and better than me. So I needed to figure some stuff out. And also, Tiernan, who won't tell me anything, is teaching Arnsbjorn like every single secret he owns. And inadvertently, through nobody's fault, not on purpose, but Tiernan really did kind of end up, by doing that, put me and Dave at heads and loggerheads about who was going to be about contesting and pushing with each other. He was always the good squire. He was always the thoughtful, caring, generous, service-oriented guy. I was always the fun squire that Tiernan could spin up and then send off and make a wreck out of somebody's camp. And he was the master at spinning me up and then making me do some verbal diarrhea stuff that was awful. But that was the first 4 years and I would get better and I would go to tournaments, and I wasn't ever fighting in any crown tournaments at the time because I was also a reservist in the Marines, and that was always opposite of events, like certain level big events. So I wasn't able to go do some of those things. And at the time, I mean, the other thing that I was told was, hey, in that era, late 90s, early 2000s, you want to be on the list to get knighted, you got to go 6 rounds in crown. Right? And that was probably pretty accurate. They're paying attention, especially when you're fighting these active guys that were monsters at the start of our kingdom, and they were still playing. But yeah, go 6 rounds in crown, and eventually you keep doing that and you keep doing this stuff, and you'll figure out where you are in the pecking order, and then that stuff will start working out for you. But one of my 2 weeks service things, I went down the Dominican Republic to go build a bridge that was washed out in a monsoon, and I tore some of the ligaments up in my leg. And this was a weird, like, April trip, just getting the foundations of the bridge set up and stuff like that, where I fell off a form that was 10 feet up in the air and landed on a block and wrecked my leg. And then I went to events that whole season on crutches, and didn't have fighting that season. And that, when I injured myself and I didn't have fighting, that's when my eyes were opened up to what else the SCA had to offer and what my responsibilities back to the organization were.
So I remember when Davin won his first crown with Groa, which I think was 99. or maybe it was 2000. Or maybe it wasn't the first one, but I was captain of his guard, and you were on the guard with me.
Yes.
And was that before or after the broken leg? Do you remember? Because you were fantastic. You were like the only reliable person.
So here's the deal on that, because yes, I think that was the year after. I think that might have been 2000, the 2000 reign. I have terrible stage fright. I have terrible insecurities being up in front of crowds. Early on in that reign, I stood guard, and I was never sure if I was supposed to help somebody up or help them down or kneel. I just freaked out, and I was like, I don't want to do that. But there's other stuff that you needed done. And so I'm handy. I'm good with my hands. I'm good at working. I made sure that I helped set up or take down and do schlep stuff every event I could that you were captain for, because that was my way of serving in lieu of being in court and being in crowds. So yeah, I bet when you said, hey, Matt, I need you to grab this thing and do that, that was me being super happy to do that, because I was terrified of the standing there with the spear. I was literally terrified by that concept. As a matter of fact, after one of those, and I think it was Davin's first reign where I did the spear thing, I went up to my knight and I said, I never want to be on a royal guard again. That was awful. And he's like, wow, you're a moron. Okay. Right. But that was, because that was torture. I was terrified all of that time. But that season, that 99 season, all the guys that I kind of figured were in my zone and we got a little pecking order on, took off, and I was behind, right? And all of a sudden, let alone the fact that I'm 20 when I'm starting, and Sven is a knight at 18. He's only a couple years older than I am, right? And I think the first time I ever met him was his second reign, right? Well, now I'm really behind the 8 ball with this guy's 3 years older than me, and he's winning these tournaments. And I had an entirely inappropriate sense of competition, right? I know I don't compete with this guy, but he's the person I want to be competing with, right? Around that time, after I got healthy again and started fighting, I know that I did some whining after some pickups at a small war to Skepti of all people. I'm like, man, I don't think I'm getting this. I can't beat you. I can't beat Skeggy. I can't beat Sven. You guys just kick my ass. And he's like, hey, little guy. Hey, little guy. Let's get real about some things. But I wanted to be able to compete with those guys, right?
Right.
I wanted to be able to compete with my peers. I knew that the guys I was fighting around at that time were coming up with me. I wanted us all to get up there, right? I just wanted to be there first. So
what did you do to get there?
I had to learn how to walk again.
Right.
I had to learn how to generate power off my feet. I had learned balance again, and I just decided that it was time to stop screwing around and get on the path. And the first 4 years, I definitely wasn't on the path at all. It's certainly not anybody's any idea of what a candidate for knighthood should be in terms of personality wise. Really not. But it was time to study, right? It was time to set small goals. It was time to do all of that stuff. So I went to the new Portland practice that was coming up that Jarl Olfred was running. And I mean, just this list of guys at the time, right? Arnsbjorn, Octamasades, Olin, Freddie, Laurencio, Yojimbo, Torkil and William Torkelson are coming to the local practices. Torfin's living in town. Tiernan, his group, I think that's around the time that Sir Dagar moved locally. I'm in this group, and these are the people that are really there. Those are the people that are still around that were there. And Ulfred had a lot of really good squires. I mean, like a big stable of squires. And for whatever reason, he let me in, you know, to push them, be part of that group. And, you know, Octamasades, you get knighted. Octamasades gets knighted a year or so before me. And people that I've been around and had a lot of thoughts on, like what the people that should be knighted, right? I know there's a lot of other names in here, but the ones that I knew at that era, Octa, you, Martin the Harper, right? Like if you stop and think about, they're knighting these people, and I am nothing like any of these people, then maybe I should probably do some make some changes, right? And I wasn't good at that. Like I said, I was the guy that you could run up, you could spin me up easy, and I would say something that would shut a party down.
Because even though you have been saying that you weren't a very good fighter, by this time you're a pretty excellent fighter, right? Like
2000.
Well, 2003.
Okay, so 2003 when you're getting knighted, right? Yeah. I considered myself to be in the same range as the people that were getting knighted as a fighter. I also knew in 2003 that the last event I was at, I just said something that made somebody's mind go click and go, yeah, we're going to wait on that guy 2 years, right?
Okay.
I believe that, and I know that, and when you got a guy like Attias come up and make a joke, and then you make a joke back, and that guy goes, oh, you know, man, you go back to your tent and you feel real small for the rest of the night, but you don't know what to do to fix it, right? And so there's that, and yeah, it was just, but at that time, at that 2000 to 2004 period, I fought 3 to 4 times a week.
Right.
I trained 3 to 4 times a week. I would fight 3 times a week, and I would pal. Right. So.
And was that?
I wasn't gonna go ahead.
Was that all from you? Like was that all self-driven? Like was that all trying to find a way to overcome this anxiety that you like beat them into submission kind of idea? Was it that mentality?
Oh, yeah, no, I was never in my head anytime that I was going to be the most courtly knight. I just didn't have it in me. And it wasn't like I'm rejecting this. It's just that I'm not the public speaker guy, right? This is perfect. I can't see all the people, right? But I'm not a great public speaker. And so I was going to have to, I think there's probably about 5 different things that you were looking for in a knight candidate. I kind of had that solidified, and I'm lacking in these 2. I've got to make up for it in these 2, right? And while I have a lot of issues with, I had a lot of issues with what I would say and how I'd come across, I knew that I never went out of the way to hurt anybody. I knew that I never went out of the way. I knew when somebody said, hey, I need a hand, I gave them a hand. I knew that there were other things. I know I'm not a bad guy. I'm just not able to speak well, right? And I had to fight. A perfect example is after I got knighted, Skeptic came up to me and says, okay, this is what did it for me, right? He goes, last summer, I saw you in a tournament, and when you're doing all your stuff, you had a picture of your kid on the back of your shield. And he's like, and then I went, okay, this guy gets it. It's not about him. I'll start thinking about him. And that's what it took. So, yeah, I mean, being a dad probably was a massive thing for my change in life.
So how old was your son at that point?
My oldest is 2.
Okay.
So my second, my ex was 4 months pregnant when I got knighted. So
So there was a point, and maybe it was after you got knighted, where you were training super hard and you were super committed and you were traveling to the West all the time. And I mean, you really took control of your training and I mean, really worked hard. Like, what was the motivation for that?
I was behind the eight ball. I was already behind. The first 5 years I was in the organization, I didn't get to go to Crown, right? Uther comes up, and I'm almost certain Uther was king of the West. And he's like, and I'd met him at Estrella and done pickup fights with him in Brand, right? And they're like, huh. And I'm unbelted. And they were like, well, you're pretty good. You got a couple things going. And they broke it down. They really enjoyed fighting me. Well, he was up here for an event and said, come on down. You're on vigil. Why don't you fight in my crown and show the Knights of the West what? And he totally played me. He's like, show the Knights of the West what an on-tier, what somebody who's going to be an on-tier knight's going to be. And I'm like, oh yeah, no. I mean, that's like he just totally spoke to everything I wanted to hear about that. So I went down and fought on vigil. While I was on vigil in June Crown, and man, West Crown is fantastic. It's a lovely place to be. It's a beautiful thing. It's culturally they're similar, but there's enough differences and all the stuff that it's super fun, and I love fighting in their crowns. I love being down there. That you go from this Viking era place, right, to more of a 12th century zone. Oddly enough, it's just kind of what it felt like, where there's more penance and more pageantry than certainly what we were doing in the mid 2000s. And that was super cool because Uther gave me the challenge. Like I hadn't been I've been pulled over, right, a couple of years, but all of a sudden I'm given the last opportunity that I'm ever going to get to make a challenge in a crown tournament. And that's something I've treasured ever since. Right. And Uther's top squire at the time challenged Jay. Then I got the second choice. I'm like, well, I'd be kind of a retard if I passed up challenging Paul Bellatrix. Right. And so, and that guy just mashed me. It was amazing. I was out in 3 in that tournament. I got owned by Paul. I took it out on a squire, and then I just got wrecked by Torfin. And I'm like, huh. But I realized that I went through all the crown jitters and stuff like that, that I still hadn't figured out how to get over the choke zone, and realized that, man, I'm going to keep doing this. So if I come down to 1 or 2 West Crowns a year, I'll get that hat time in a crown level tourney. And I'm obviously not good enough to win this tournament, so it's not like it's a danger to anybody.
Right.
Yeah, and so that happened. And I did. And there was times where I would work. I was still working 2 jobs at the time. So there are times where I would work and save money so I could fly down. My second job would pay for the hobby kind of thing. But yeah.
So Merrick has a really good question. He says, as you were training, how did you manage your peaks and plateaus? And do you feel you have a realistic evaluation of your personal prowess?
I have a realistic idea of where I am when I'm in training, right? And Merrick's going to totally understand my answers. I feel like I can hang with the big guys. I don't think I am one, but I feel like I can hang in, and they got to give me real fights. One of the peaks and lows was that's something as I was coming up that I got really lucky with the people I was fighting around, right? I am never going to have the hand speed that Tiernan or William Torkelson did. I'm never going to be strong like Frederick or Olin. I'm not as unpredictable as Lorenzo or Yojimbo. My footwork's not as good as Octa's. Boom. That's where I was, or Arnsbjorn's. That guy played tennis and he has fantastic footwork. That's where I was living. And I realized that there was no way I was ever going to bounce out and be the best and start dominating by doing these things that physically were not possible for me. So all of my fighting is about living where the other guy isn't good at. I'm not as fast as Tiernan, but my footwork's better, right? So I got to make it about that fight. I'm not as strong as Olin, but I'm faster than him. My footwork's not as good as Octa's, right? But my speed is better and he's not stronger than me. So, I mean, there's just a lot of this other stuff that, so I never had peaks or plateaus because there was always something that wasn't going to work on somebody. And I was always doing 6 things at a practice, right? I'm always working on, there's always, every practice from 2000 to 2004, I came up with a little cycle of things really early on. And every practice, it was because I was going to work on something on offense, something on defense, and something on range and footwork. And then I also broke it down as I always had to do a mental training about visualizing and analyzing. I always had to do I wrote that down. Physical stuff, right? Hey, I can't throw the shot. What do I do to throw, physically make that happen? That's different than a tactical. And then I always had to fight, do something to manipulate myself or my opponent emotionally during the fight, right? One of my favorite books I've ever read that is applied directly to my fighting is a book called Caro's Book of Poker Tells. And it's about bluffing and about not getting bluffed. And the best line in that book is, look strong when you're weak, look weak when you're strong. And that is super important for me in my fighting style.
So you a lot of stuff you're talking about there, do you pre-plan your fights? Like you're talking about, like knowing where the guy's strong and weak. Are you thinking about that ahead of time before the engagement, especially in tournaments? Do you plan out a lot of that stuff, or is it more just allowing it to happen?
No. Now, I'd say for the last 5 years or so, once I figured out some of my emotional hangups, I don't like my opponent to do anything.
So I want to talk about your emotional hangups for a minute because we totally skipped your knighting and we're going to go back to it. Do you mind if we go over a little bit in time?
I'm here for you.
Okay, cool.
I've been blathering for a long time. Look, I can go forever.
Okay, well, we're going to go over a little bit because we haven't really gotten into the meat of like your reigning or anything, but I want to talk about your emotional and your mental part because, you know, most people that know you, sorry, my dog is being a pill, know that you were at like crown level contender, making the finals for like a decade, right? Before you won your first crown. I think it's at least a decade.
I think 12 years.
Yeah. So what clicked for you? Because I mean, something must have clicked and you must have worked on something because all of a sudden it clicked for you.
So within the first 16 months of my getting knighted, I finaled in West Crown twice in a row. Right? I don't know why. I didn't know why. I still don't know why I was fighting at that level in those years at that event. A big suspicion of mine is emotional baggage. And I'm in a foreign kingdom and I'm fighting foreign guys and they don't know me. I don't know them. I don't know that I'm supposed to be afraid of them. I don't have any of the stuff. So I think that I did really well. And I got lucky because both those guys that destroyed me in the finals broke it down for me immediately after. And it was basic tenets. When I was in the finals of those tournaments, I wasn't even worried about whether I was winning or losing those tournaments.
Well, right, because you were totally able to relax in those tournaments, right? Because, you know, you had already told us before, like you were going down there, you know, you're not going to win anyway, right?
Yeah.
so there's no pressure. But when there was pressure, I mean, because you finaled in Kaid and you finaled in Ontier at least twice before you won, right?
So it was 2 in the West, 1 in Ontier, 2 in Kaid, and then I did win here.
Okay.
I never finaled before I moved, after I moved back and then won.
Right.
Right.
So there was no aha moment that made it all click for you?
Oh, there's 15 million.
Right. What were you working on to get to that?
There's one, okay, well, there's one very specific moment. Okay, so I lost every tournament I ever entered until I won Crown, until I won the one, right? I always took every time I went 4 rounds or 6 rounds or 8 rounds or final 8 or final 4 or in the finals personally that I lost it. None of my opponents get any credit for being better than me. Screw those guys. That's not real, but that's my emotional input into my training system. So, okay, I didn't win that tournament. What did I do wrong? What do I need to fix? Everybody that you talk to that wants you to get better is going to tell you to do that, right? In that same year, I went to Penzig and got invited to the last best of the best tournament that they threw and lost that one.
In the finals?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I don't want to speak ill of anybody, but I lost it in a way that I was deeply upset about and ashamed about at the time. And basically like half a dozen reigning crowns came up and congratulated me on losing well. And that fucked my head up huge forever, right? So now, not only can I not ever make a choice to not take a shot, I can never even make it look like I might be making a choice not to take a shot or making a bad thing, but I owed it to everybody that ever saw that fight, and that was the last time they did it. They shut it down after that because it had a reputation for a long time. But I owe it to all those guys that said, "Hey, man, you did a good job. Appreciate the way you did it." I based all of my reputation, all of my self-identity and self-worth on being the guy that tries to make the right choice. That's the highest and lowest moment in my fighting career ever. I'll never forget it. I'm grateful to all those heroes that told me to keep working on that path. And there's a bunch of guys that were there that they know who they are. So going back to what it was you were saying, I'm doing really well. And
well, is there a point where you changed your victory conditions? Because, you're talking about you always felt like a loser or that you lost the fights, even though you're fighting really well. And, everybody in the comments that saw that best of the best thing said that you hit the dude a bunch and you fought really well. And
don't worry about the comments. No.
Whatever. But I mean, at some point, did you sort of adopt a victory conditions kind of a thing, or?
Yeah. And I'm still trying to compete to win. But right there, that was my victory condition from then on. And it was put on me by these guys that are names. But it was walk off the field with your honor intact. And I know I've made honest mistakes. There's no way you can't make an honest, confused mistake. But
nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
And shots are missed. That's part of it. It's such a subjective thing. But I try to err on generous on that. But if I walk off the field with my honor, then I win that fight.
So do you think that took some of the pressure off of you?
No, I still want to beat everybody all the time. Right. And here I am hanging out with these people and I was definitely with a crowd of people that for the first 4 or 5 years after that, when are you gonna finish this? When are you gonna get this done? There's a lot of really good people that have advised me through that, and basically their advice is this is kind of a thing, but this is your headspace. You need to get over this. And that was that. So, you know, my finals with Cedric was such a fantastic thing. And that was Kieran and I fought in the crown before that in the semifinals. And we're looking over at Cedric and he's like, just lost it. And I look at my knight and I'm like, whichever one of us wins this fight's going to be king. Tierna's like, yeah, and then murders me, right? And then goes and beats Cedric. Well, I'm like, so then I'm in the finals with Cedric the very next time around. And I'm like, God, I hope that guy's choking again. I hope he's choking worse than I am because I'm going to choke too. And he didn't, right? And at that point, I started wondering, maybe I should just be the guy that takes second all the time. That's freaking respectable. Maybe if I can be the guy that shows class by losing, that will fill some of the void with which I am attempting to, fill. But in Kaid, I got beat. I got beat by Sven. There's literally, if you find video of that tournament, you can see that he did a thing that made me take a giant step. And before he threw the shot, I knew I was dead. And I had a very specific word I used publicly as he was hitting me. Right? Oh, that guy just juked me out of my pants. And Agrippa, his style and conditioning beat me. That was during the point in time when I realized that my shelf life was not forever, and I was having some injury issues.
So you're known for like we were talking about, like your mental game and all that. Can you talk us a little bit about the day of a tournament, especially maybe the two big ones, your two big crown wins? What
Sure.
was the mental process like? Like, if you were to explain this to a new squire or somebody who's trying to figure this out, what would be some basic things that you were doing those days that were really important?
I did everything wrong. So I'm not good at saying like how to do this. I can always look at somebody and go, okay, you don't want to do this. This is wrong. I did that. I'm really good teaching negatively like that. Like, hey, don't screw up like I did. Do something different. And I'm a much better like drop a point in teacher than I am like a holistic thing. I tried everything. Okay, what is it I did last tournament that was really successful? And then I'd be in this tournament. I'm still fighting last tournament. And that's not the way to go. One, I gave up after I moved up here on the idea. I wanted it. I told my friends I wanted it, but I didn't believe I'd do it. So I gave up on all of that stuff. I gave up on trying to find a specific thing. Sometimes I eat breakfast. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I always drink coffee. But that's because I have a coffee issue. I don't do things that I make sure I'm not sabotaging myself, right? Okay. I make sure I go through my armor and make sure that every single one of my belt buckles and straps is oiled and polished and taken care of. And that's not like a pride thing. That's because when I lost to Fabian, my pants fell off in the finals.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah, no, fair. Okay.
They flat out fell off in the tournament, right? That's never going to happen again. That certainly blew me right out of any headspace that needs to be, because you're there with your pants down and a half a dozen duchesses giggling because that shit's funny.
Yep.
Right? That's
funny, everybody but you, yeah.
So I make sure I get my ducks in the row. I make sure that I have two swords that are exactly the same, because I've broken a sword in a crown tourney. I make sure that I'm doing things I need to do not to sabotage myself. I have a beer or two the night before, but I won't drink. I won't fight hungover. That's not good. I make sure that I eat when I'm hungry. I pay attention to my blood sugar level. I'm getting kind of teppish. I need some sugar, right? Other than that, if I feel myself losing headspace, I go do some fighting. If I feel like I'm in the groove, I stay in the groove. Mostly you guys will see me do this. I will wander around and ask everybody else how they're doing all day long. So that way I don't have to think about how I'm doing. Right. And it makes me seem like a super nice guy, but really I am just pushing the demons back all day long.
So your last crown that you won against Skepti in the final, I mean, you dominated the final, like
That
dominated.
guy knighted me. I told him before that finals I was there to hurt him. I wanted that guy to see how good I got. But that's not what it was. Again, I got all the head weasels going on, and I'm like, in the final four, I'm like, these guys are all great guys, right? I'm as good as any of these guys, but man, those guys, I'd like to see all these guys be king again. I'd like to see them be king. And as hard as I would try not to, something in me just hit the brakes, punched a clutch, and I'd spaz out in all these tournaments. And it was never a choice. I just, man, trust me, like for a dozen years, you would rather fight me in the finals of a tournament or the quarterfinals than at any time before that, because I just got my own way. Morgan and Livia moved here. They're close friends of ours. Right when they moved here, we clicked, stuff like that. My first finals was with Morgan, the one that I won. All right. And I don't think a lot of people know this, but we're camping together. We're prepping for finals together. They're real new here in our kingdom, like a year and a half. They've got 2 young kids. I think, man, my friend's done this before. He'd do a good job. His wife walks up to him and goes, if you win this tournament, get your own ride home, right? In front of me. And for the first time ever in my entire life, I went, if that fucker wins, I'm going to have to drive him home, and I'm going to be mad about that. But also, the first time ever, I'm like, am I winning this tournament?
Or Morgan's going to have a really tough year in his marriage.
Not tough year, but my winning this tournament is better for everybody involved right now. And it's the first instant that I ever believed that maybe I should be. Maybe I could be king. I wanted it. I thought it. I thought I believed it, but it was the first time I believed it. I don't know if they know that I heard that conversation either. But I also know that Morgan's really good, and he was not as sharp as he should have been in that finals. And that's just how that is. But I pushed an extra couple inches in one of those fights because I wanted to beat him more. And I think that you get into that. And super good, clean fights. The second time around with Skepti, I'd had a bad reign. I'd had not a bad reign. I had I did this. This is not for me reign. And I was like, hey, we don't have enough counts in our kingdom, right? Maybe I'll just stop here. And something happened in the middle of that tournament that lit me up. And about halfway through the 7th round, I just went up to my wife and I'm like, we have money in the bank, because all that's left in this tournament is me and dead guys. And then I just rolled through the tournament. And I don't know how to explain that self-confidence either.
Well, it was really pretty to watch, even if you don't understand what you did. So tell me about the first reign and why it was hard for you.
I did it wrong.
Okay.
Did it wrong. We did not do it wrong. I did it wrong. That king is this thing that's up here, and the final say and the decision maker and this stuff. And while we did my best to get advice and get stuff, it was super lonely. I just didn't like how lonely it was. I figured out how not to be lonely the second time. But no, didn't like that. There's some hard calls. The bod stopped calling me about that reign, so I'm good.
Okay. So tell me you already pretty much told us your favorite part of being crown story. But
AOA's still. I love recognizing peers, but and I love these other ones, but I love every single word that we have, actually. And I like how that some of them can get very specific and some of them can be very thoughtful. Peerages, I feel lucky to be able to recognize the person that the order is freaking saying, hey, right? I feel lucky to be in a timeline on that. But I don't feel super responsible for the vast majority of those. I love the ceremonies. I love that 15 minutes. I love the wedding, but nobody gets made a peer unless they have a big cheer group in that peers. There's a thing about how you make a peer or you recognize peers. I think that you do make peers, but you also recognize peers, and that's super cool. But that AOA and giving awards is the only reward for 6-7 days worth of work, right? I don't get to fight. I was broken that whole both reigns anyway, so I couldn't fight. But no, it was the giving awards, getting to be in the position to recognize fantastic people is the best part of reigning. That's it, right? Finding out that these people that you don't know, and there's this letter, you're like, holy crap, that person is amazing. Let's do it, right? Or that stuff. So, but the AOA is my favorite one. It's that you're part of us now award. So
early on in this thing, you said you had like 5 or 6 things that you saw as being a knight. How has that evolved? Like now, as a person who's made that decision, has that actually changed? Like, would you still say those 4 or 5 core values, or 5 or 6 core values, are still the same values you look for?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the virtues, the chivalric virtues. You know, humility, prowess. Those are the only 2 I know off the top of my head. I've had a couple drinks. Sorry, but those virtues, you want to look into that, and you want to make sure. Making a peer is as much a responsibility. It's way more of a responsibility as Crown as a grant or an AOA. And I think that we should try to find a way to emphasize that aspect of it as much as possible, because I think that every time you make a peer, you are defining to the populace what that order should and can be.
You're setting a new bar.
What's that?
You're setting that new bar.
Not necessarily a bar, but hey, we're celebrating that this person is a leader and is this and that, and that's a necessary thing. And I think that there's got to be a better way to say, this is the knight, this is the laurel, this is the master of defense, this is the pelican. And we're telling the populace, this person is a hero. This person might not be somebody you personally like, but this person is a hero, and we should be celebrating their next step in what it is they're doing.
That's a really cool perspective, actually. Yeah, I like that.
So tell us about the name change after the second reign.
It was Tiernan changed his name when he stepped up as king. He went from Tiernan Delkai to Tiernan More Delkai. And if you're familiar with any Irish stuff, it means the great, and it's a name that you add when you're king. And I always thought that was kind of cool, kind of funny, but that was always a placeholder in my mind of, hey, if that's a great concept, what am I going to do or what could I do with that? When we were living in Caid, we ran into a young crew of guys that were all proto squires or squires. There's like 4 or 5 of them. And I want to say at least 4 of them are knights now, right? 6. So this is probably 2012. 8 years later, I think all of them are knights, or all of them are pelicans, and they're all leaders now. But you know, when you've been playing for a little bit, you recognize that group of guys that, oh, those guys are going to go someplace, right? And they were all in the same household, and they did this stuff. And they were a bunch of gamer geeks, and they were all new at fighting. And we did a war thing, And I just pulled off that magical hat trick where I was able to split them apart so they couldn't support each other, and I killed like half of them, right? So they decided that I was going to be some game card character called Blue Eyes White Dragon, and they made a joke out of it, right? And then one of the guys squires to Tamiki, and Tamiki's lady makes a fantastic shield. So I had a war shield, right? And I'm like, I want a white dragon with blue eyes on the war shield. And as an homage to these guys, who they were a kick-ass group of guys. Then when I got up here, there's also an aspect about how in Kaid there was a guy that ended up not being super popular and gets removed from the kingdom, and they refer to him as Dragon rather than by name and stuff. And I always thought that was kind of funny, and I wanted to repurpose the name. So when Dreki is actually a horrible spelling for Norse Draga, that's actually how it's pronounced, and it's the Norse word for dragon. So I put the Blue Eyes White Dragon as a nickname on my thing, and then when I step down, that's what it is. And I'm absolutely certain that this dragon has blue eyes on it somewhere, because that's so. But that was the name change. It was kind of a situation of like doing what Dad did, right? So.
So Arnsbjorn asks, what's the connection like between yourself and a peer that you've made moving forward?
Arnsbjorn knows the answer to this.
He also sent me a picture of you with your murder face when you were still a squire, but he sent it too late for me to use it. So
that was not a murder face being mad at him for getting squired. Like he likes to say, that's a murder face because I was terrified of opening my mouth at that time. So I just walked around angry all the time back then. That was what I was good at.
I don't think you were angry. You just, every time you opened your mouth, something bad happened, right?
I have a pretty intense face sometimes, and I get a lot of stuff for that. But I also focus in. So that is actually probably more like me really concentrating and being present face. What was the other question? I'm sorry.
It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Just the connection going
to this question.
Okay. The connection going forward between you and a peer you've made.
I feel connected personally. I feel ownership. I do feel like it was certainly not like the Crown's decision in a void. But like I said, because I was lucky enough to be in that time and place, I don't want to lose that connection. And I don't know that I feel like I own it, but I feel like that there's definitely an ownership. I don't own that, but I feel like there's a possessiveness to that. I certainly understand why when Skepti would contact me out of the blue and go, hey, I've been keeping track of you, I can totally understand why on the other end of that, where that is. So.
Interesting. Maybe I should feel sad because Davin's never checked in on me. Maybe not.
Skepti also feels a considerable ownership because he and another guy were basically two guys in that when I started to get serious phase. They're like, hey man, these are all the mistakes I made, and I see you doing that. Don't do this, right? And him and one other guy who doesn't play anymore, both basically like, everybody thinks I'm this way because of this, and I don't want you to go through that, and went and headed me off from a lot of trouble, well before I deserved that kind of help. So.
Well, I think you're really tough on yourself. As somebody who also has a very intense face, I think sometimes when you're concentrating or whatever, it doesn't actually mean you're angry. It just means you're thinking. So I think you should cut yourself a little slack.
Oh, I know my face looks angry when I'm just concentrating. It's not my fault. That's Dave's fault. He's the one that gets everything wrong.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Bren, do you have anything else you want to ask?
not in this moment, no. No. I guess I just relate a lot to what you're talking about with like the demons in your head. Like I have a lot of that myself, and I guess it's really cool to see somebody who fights demons, maybe not the way I do, but like I do, be able to be successful and overcome it. Um, like like that whole thing you were talking about, like maybe I should just be a count forever, and we don't have enough counts, so I'll just do this now. That kind of mentality I very much understand and very relate to. Not the count part, obviously, but the self doubt and just being accepting where you are, and it's hard to push through that. So I really resonate with that. It's cool.
So I don't want you to take me the wrong way. I have a ginormous sense of self-drive, right?
Yep.
The ego, I guess. I still don't want to be second best at anything, but at the same time, somebody with my kind of brain weasels, I don't want to be second best, but I always hesitate to reach for best, and so it's a super conflicting nightmare land in my cranium.
What I think is super cool is that you've been at this high level of fighting for a really long time, and it's a really sort of, like, I've thought about it a lot. Like it's a really hard line to walk where you want this thing, but you can't want it too much because then you fuck yourself, right? So
Oh no, it's called despair, and I did that for several years.
right, but you were able to want it but let go of needing it, right?
No,
No.
no, I needed it. I never stopped needing it. I was able to trick myself into changing my victory conditions. Right. I think that successful people are really nimble with their victory conditions.
Yes.
I don't need to go win every fight. I need to make sure I don't get legged today. Right. And I need to do this. I need to not get hit by that guy's flat snap today. There's all sorts of that stuff. But it's super weird. I like seeing the people I'm around have really good days. But I was talking to Duke Eric, I think during his second reign, right? Before I'd won, right at that point where I'd given up being able to really believe that this was going to be something for me, right? And so I changed my victory conditions at that time. I may never be a Duke. I may never win a crown, but I felt like I'm somebody who can fight at that level in pickups. And I have a lot of Dukes that are friends, right? And I certainly felt like I belonged into the idea club of what a knight should be and this and that, because those guys walked it and talked it in front of me every day, and I just copied them till I got it right.
The whole fake it till you make it idea.
100%. 100%. I got super lucky. So the economy crashes and we have to move someplace to follow work. But I was also really lucky at that point in time to have some headway with people in the West when we moved there for 8 months, that they knew who I was. We all liked each other because we saw each other twice a year, right? And I'm good at being on my best behavior for 48 hours. So that's, I'd gotten that down. But I got a chance to redefine myself a little bit there. And then a few months later, we chased work again down the Caid, and I really realized that there were some hangups I had that I could let go and make some really work to be okay. So maybe I'm not just the fighting knight that's not good at the social stuff. Maybe I want to be good at that stuff too. And I was finally able to drop all that baggage. worked really hard on getting over my public speaking fright. I actually heralded a court for a royal court once. But all of that stuff, all the brain weasels, I just picked a thing and worked on it one at a time until I could kind of set it down and be comfortable with it.
So go ahead.
So I was just gonna say, I think that's a really good thing for people to take away from this is, how to overcome those things is just literally one at a time and kind of inoculate yourself, not saying that word right, to it until it become easier and then find something else.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, that worked for me. I don't know. I don't have to be the master at everything. I just have to not be afraid of all the things that are in the boxes in my head.
Right. So you push yourself outside your comfort zone so that you can become more comfortable with the things you're afraid of.
Not only that, but when you're in these new locations and with these new groups of people, or new to you people, like they don't know.
You get to reinvent yourself.
They don't know about that time you fell on a table, off a table in the middle of a royal party, right? Yeah. Man, I missed that story. Shoot. They don't know about that time you did that one really funny anecdote thing that everybody went, oh man, at least he's funny, right? I mean, that stuff.
Okay, I'm gonna ask another Merrick question because it's good. Who is your biggest influencer to inspire you to win Crown Journey? Who made you say, I want to be like that guy or girl?
I got lucky in my timing, seeing Thorin as Crown at 30 year and brushing past him, here and there over the years. And that guy's turned out to be exactly who I'd hoped he would. Right. Who pushed me, who said, I want to be like Thorin. In on tier specific thing, I think Torgal quit like the year I started, and I've never seen him fight. Thorin, there's like I had a love-hate relationship with Sven for years. I don't know. That guy was like as close to a hero that I would let myself have, but I don't like having heroes, so that's weird. Ultimately, my wife, right? Holy shit, this person can do a lot more good from a position on that throne than I think, than I can, and I think that she should be up there. So
you think that helped you a lot with this, like your decision to do this, as you knew she was going to do such a great job? Do you think it gave you more freedom to be able to go and win it?
Yeah. But see, we met right in that 2005 period. So mostly we've just gone through a bunch of, ups and downs and knocks and stuff in life. And, it's just, again, the part where I know where I'm not going to be able to step up, right? She's got all those bases covered. It's a perfect compliment for my stuff when it comes to that. And she's wicked smart and one of the most caring people I've ever met. So
she is that. So is this story that we missed something about my vigil that I don't know about?
About your vigil?
Oh, okay. Arnsbjorn's being a dork then. He said there's something about my vigil that...
Well, I do remember one of my best early memories of fighting was, I know that as a squire in the late 90s, the last time I made a decision consciously, no, that shot wasn't hard enough, was a fight against you.
Yeah, we talked about this.
And yeah, but we should talk about it here. I was a squire and I went, no, that's not hard enough. Let's keep fighting. And I think I won that fight. And my knight comes up and is like, yeah, man, that was super clean. You should go deal with this. And I went up and I said, hey, I think that maybe I made a bad call. And you're like, and you just looked at me and you went, no, I completely trust you. And I went, well, I am going to damn well make sure nobody ever feels like that's misplaced again. And that's right there in that bag of reasons to be what you want to be. The other one is that summer that I was on crutches, they'd move Eagles to this new site that was full of blackberry bushes and trails. And I was drinking with this group of guys on my crutches, and they decided to go roll off to another party, and they just ditched my hobble little butt. And so I'm hobbling down this trail all by myself, and I come across this bottle of Bärenjäger in the middle of a pathway attached to a string and a fishing pole. And I had one of the best, most delightful conversations with you. That I think that's the one where I went, well, we're friends now for sure. We had a great conversation. Do you remember doing that?
I remember the fishing poles because it was Uncle Pat fishing, right?
No, that was you fishing. I think you were single. And you were using a bottle of Bärenjäger in the middle of the pathway.
Are you sure it was me?
I know it was you.
Okay. I honestly have no memory of that.
Because you were like, yeah, I'm single. I'm using this bottle of Bärenjäger's bait. And
Really?
You were pretty lit.
Oh, well, I'm glad I don't drink like that anymore. I'm glad we had a good conversation, though, and I wasn't weird or handsy or whatever.
No, nothing like that. No.
Okay. Well, somebody says it might have been Dawn. Are you sure it wasn't Dawn?
I know the difference between you and Dawn.
Oak doesn't. Oak always thinks we're the same person. So anyway, are we ready to look at his killing tool?
Sure.
Yeah. All right, let's look at your killing tool. Dawn says it was her.
Was it Dawn? God damn it. I was drunk. I'm sorry. It was Dawn? Oh, man. No,
I remember doing that.
I've always thought that was you.
Doesn't sound like me.
It doesn't sound like Dawn either. That's why I thought it was super funny.
Oh,
But
that's hilarious.
we'll all have a good laugh
I love that.
later
I love
when we're
that.
together. That's for sure.
All right.
What do you want to know?
How long is it?
I didn't know that until I saw these videos. I had to measure it. It is exactly long enough so that way when I want to do a tight deer drop close to my body, right, it doesn't touch the ground.
Okay. So you just cut it so that it's
I just kept cutting it so it never touched the ground when I fought. Turns out that means it's 35 inches, right? But that's why it's the length it is so that way when I do a really inside teardrop, it doesn't scratch the ground. 35-inch stick with 1.5 inch pad. So I guess overall 37, whatever that math is, 36.5, right? The plastic hilts that have been around for 20 years. This sword is also like 2 years old, so I'll change that up when I change it.
What kind of tape do you use?
So I do a spiral of strapping tape and then a reverse spiral of strapping tape. And then, so basically it's all integrated XE, right? I'll put the thrusting tip on. I use old, I use old tie down strap for like ratchet down strap, that webbing on that. And it's because it doesn't stretch when it gets wet like leather does up here. And it's roughly sticky enough it's sticky enough for that. I have a kind of an apple core shaped pommel. So it's small at this end, small at that end, and then it's a nice big socket that like fit that round pommel in my hand.
So is that 2 triggers in there?
So it's in case my trigger is a trigger where I put my index finger, my middle finger in and my index finger over.
Okay.
Okay. So it's a single finger, it's a double finger trigger, but I lock it down.
Okay.
Okay. And because the way I throw shots, I want that trigger to be all the way up into my knuckle, so it's offside. It's offset. I actually use the oval of the handle to tell me which direction I'm throwing it in. The other trigger on the opposite side is in case I get armed and I need to switch over my left hand. I have one for my left hand in there as well.
Smart.
So,
Good hand.
Heavy duty duct tape, red athletic tape. I started going basically dark grays and blacks and red ages ago. In the West Kingdom, thrusting tips need to be red. I just thought I'd make the blade the same as the thrusting tip. And it's all held together with strapping tape and then covered up. So I strap it out and then I start doing the balance work and the weight work on it with the duct tape. So, but the thrusting tip has to be on, and I just add weight till it feels like I add weight to my sword until it flows like my framing hammer.
Makes sense, yeah.
I'm a framing carpenter is my career. Plenty of times as I'm framing stuff, I'm rolling wraps or offsides or, it's about putting repetition on, and I've driven over 1 million nails. I might as well use that to my advantage in this. It's not certainly balanced exactly but it flows. That power generation leaves my hand exactly like my framing hammer does. And then this one it's actually a little bit lighter than it was a couple years ago. So this is 2 3/4 pounds. So again, I'm not fast. But I do a lot of stuff where I like to throw shots that manipulate your sword or your shield. So having a little bit more weight in my sword helps out with that.
And how long does the sword usually last you?
Depending on how much you fight, I've blown through swords in a month. Like I said, this one's old. This one was new. Oh man, this one was new September Crown over a year ago. Right. This is the one I won that tournament with, and I haven't been doing a lot of stick time since then. So
there's one more question until we get to the 10 questions. What were you gonna say? I'm sorry.
No, it was September Crown, but go ahead.
Now that you're a royal peer and more appropriately a duke, do you feel more compelled to teach and be a patron for people who are still up and coming?
More inclined? No. I discovered several years ago, I like to drop in and help out with a little bit here and there, right? I haven't had any squires since I moved up here, but I think that being a royal peer is going to help with my credibility, right? People will be like, yeah, whatever, to me as much anymore. But I don't think that there's that much change. Certainly not from knight to count jarl, right? That didn't change at all.
Okay, so I have to go back for a second because I don't think you've ever really had a problem with credibility. I would have put you in the same sort of category as
I am comparing myself. I'm comparing myself to the dukes.
Right. But
I don't have their credibility.
I was gonna say I would put you in the same sort of category as Stefan of Dresden or Brand of the West, who fight like dukes but haven't won a crown, and they get the same kind of respect as the dukes, but you don't feel that. At least you didn't until you won.
No. A long time ago, and this is my personal thing, a long time ago, I realized that the prowess part of being a duke, right, is a real prowess. Is you're not a fluke. You've done this. You can do this. My respect for everybody that's gone back and dipped back into reigning is from right outside that box, seeing how difficult that was. Right, I was not at all. not at all that surprised at what the emotional load of reigning was going to be. There's a couple things that you get blindsided by or whatever, but that part, no. My respect for Dukes has always been, for years, has been, and those guys care a lot, and especially the ones that go back for the third and fourth and fifth times. Like that, like this matters to them, and it is not an ego trip at that point in time at all.
Do you think you will?
Huh?
Do you think you'll try for a third?
I'm gonna have to learn how to fight with a broken body in order to do that. But
he's gonna figure that out. All right, let's do the 10. I've had you here for a long time, and I feel a little bad about it, but I have really enjoyed listening to your story. Thank you for being so open about it.
Well, I've watched a couple of them, and look, here's the thing. Man, I love this hobby. I love our sport. I love the martial art. I love all of it, but it's not easy. And if people that are watching this get the impression that these guys are rolling in here and having some inherent skills and abilities, no, I'm a super technical fighter when I train. I'm a bystander when I'm fighting in tournaments, though. I mean, it's a weird. Yeah. So, and it took me a long time to figure out how to get over my own stuff. And I think that happens to a lot of people.
Very relatable. Anyway, if you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
So, and hopefully he's watching this. Jade's taken several years off. And one of the most dynamic fighters I've ever fought. I just love the explosiveness and the stuff with that. I would love for him to get back in armor and see what he does rebuilding his fighting from whatever he is at right now up, and then getting a chance to fight him again. I really like fighting Jade. Really like fighting him.
Cool. Who would you like to see reign in your kingdom?
There's a lot of people. You have to give me a top number in order to be able to narrow that down.
What do you mean a top number?
So
you can say up to 5.
Oh, up to 5. That's too many. I can't count that high.
All right, 3. 3's good.
I know it's. I think you do a fantastic job. I'd like to see that. I really would. More than anybody, I would like to see Ulfgar reign. That guy is. You want to talk about somebody who's going to sit that throne and give and give and give and just blow it out of the water. That guy's one of the most giving knights that there is around. I'd like to see that happen for him someday.
He's a super generous dude.
Yeah.
If you could talk stick with anyone in the world for an hour, who would it be?
Well, that's hard, right? If I get into these conversations and if I'm going to run into a Branos or some of these guys that I haven't met, I'm not going to do any talking. I'm just going to suck it up. But right now, I just like to be in a circle with a lot of this stuff. I don't think about fighting like most people do. I come at everything backwards. So it's really cool to hear language expounded upon and that kind of thing.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean you come by it backwards?
Well, let's say when I do Pell work, which is infrequent, I don't go throw a shot at the Pell. I start off with my sword on the Pell where I want to hit and get myself into balance at that point in time, and then figure out how to go backwards from balance to balance in reverse. When I fight other people. I put a mirror up behind my pal for years, so I see what I look like when I'm throwing stuff. And so now I can visualize what the other guy sees when I'm doing things. And I really enjoy leaving openings that I know that they can't not hit. That kind of thing. So, but it's all backwards. This is the end result I want. Not how do I get there, but how do I get back to normal from there? And then that stuff just happens.
Cool.
So,
Do you get a lot of that from your work, like from being a carpenter? Do you find that that's something you've learned there and it transferred over? Or
yeah, I would say as my skills at reading blueprints, specifically prints, that stuff, that really helped a skill set in doing what I do. I can look at the prints of a house and visualize it. X-ray vision. I know where these wires are going to be in this wall because this is how it's, and that's kind of how I approach my fighting. I approach it from the finished product backwards to the foundation.
Okay. Did you name someone? Did I miss it?
Everybody, anybody.
Anybody.
Right now, honestly, I'd like to do is spend an hour with a hungry guy that hasn't had anybody talk to him. And spend the first 20 minutes talking to him, and the next 20 minutes and the next 40 minutes grabbing the guy that I think fits his brain and then watching them talk. That's interesting. I don't have a person. I learn from every single guy I fight, every single person I talk to, still. Tons, all the time. It's actually, I'm learning more now than I was 8 years ago.
Arnsbjorn wants to know, when was the last time you broke everything down to rebuild it?
I started that last week.
Last week?
Yep.
Okay. What is your favorite medieval-esque or period movie?
Okay, we told you to start my love-hate relationship with Lord of the Rings. Currently, my favorite one is, I like bleak, dark stories. There's one that came out about 10 years ago starring Sean Bain and Eddie Redmayne called The Black Death. And it's pretty good.
I'll have to check that one out. I don't think I've seen it.
I think you can track it down on Amazon right now. Okay. But it's like middle of the plague. They got to go get a witch, and it's really good. And it's more drama than it is action, but it's my kind of uplifting, heartfelt kind of story.
Cool.
Absolutely.
If you could add a rule to the rules of the list, what would it be?
I've gone back and forth on that my whole career. No, these are the rules, right? I think it's our job. Look, these are the rules we came up under. Let's protect those rules for the next guys. If we can really come up with a better system, then let's look at that. But let's give the next generation a chance, right? They work for what we do. I know people don't like fighting from their knees. I know, all that stuff. You can take that leg as a death, right? Just,
right. Lots of people do.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. What's your favorite tournament format?
Yes.
Yes. I would say yes.
One way you come up and get somebody.
All of them, any of them. Speed tourneys, round robins, double elimination. Just tell me what that tournament's going to be right before I start fighting in it, and that's the tournament I'm going to fight to.
Excellent. What's your favorite event?
On tier, West War. Sometimes it's West on tier War, but it's my favorite event when it's on tier West War. I love this war. It is two kingdoms that are different enough to be fun together and the same enough to be playing the same and have the same goals and have the same heart. Our cultures are different. Our kingdom's heart is the same, and I love it. I used to get made fun of for loving the West more than on tier and whatever. I love that kingdom. I love the people down there. It's one of my favorite. I've learned some of the most profound things from a slightly twisted. People have said things that I've heard on tier, but they said them in a 15-degree angle differently, that they really connected to me in a way that I was able to put it all together about what the chivalry and the knighthood is. And it's my favorite event because it's big enough to do all the things, but it's so far away from a major airport that it's never going to be an interkingdom event that has to deal with a lot of the other grand garbage, right? The only times I missed that event are when I lived in Caid and we couldn't afford the 13-hour drive to get here. And I want you guys to know that when the Royals of Caid and the Caidans that come to that event, because they've discovered how awesome it is, they are driving farther than any of us are to get there. So
I've been super impressed. They've been coming regularly.
Yeah, you can't beat the site. You cannot beat that site.
That's true. If you could have any helmet in the world, regardless of cost, what kind would it be?
I have it.
You have it? Your face?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to throw my face at Duke Sven's sword so hard that it caused that cut. And that's what happened, man. That guy juked me out of my pants. It was crazy. So it caused a pressure cut, and my wife was like, "Is your helmet too small?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Right. And so we were able to go back to Vrin and get the helmet that I have now. The last 15 years, I've had a couple different iterations of a very clean, very basic helmet with a face on it. And this one is by far my favorite version of that.
That picture is epic, though, with your blood coming down your face. I put it in the calendar this year.
All right.
Oh, isn't it? Isn't it July?
I don't know what month it is. It's in my calendar.
I remember about that because that was the first fight. And Steercar's a doctor and marshal. And he walks up and he's like, "Hey, man, you know, you're bleeding." I'm like, "Yeah. Are you going to let me finish the tournament?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yep, you can do that. Just don't pass out." And so, nope, it was good.
Nice. It's Saturday morning at Estrella, and several people want to talk to you about last night. What did you do?
Well, I don't know what Tiernan was doing at Estrella, but he spun me up, and he still has the ability to do that. He still has the buttons. He installed the program module way early, and he got me spun up and got me to do something that sounded like a fantastic idea at the time, but it turns out it was not well thought out, and he left right before I did it. That's his superpower.
Nice. Who's your favorite fight ever?
This one was hard, and I can't break it down into. I can't break it down into a single. There are a lot of really good friends of mine that I don't necessarily know. I have a really good recollection of meeting them or having a first fight with them. But when I was at Penzig and I met Sean and we had a couple sets, that's my favorite fight ever because it was exhilarating and humbling, and it started a long friendship. That was 2005. And that was both of us at the end of the day on the Penzig pickup field. I don't think there were a lot of people left, and we wore each other out and finished that up. And then we clicked. Our fighting clicked. Something about me and a guy from a completely different kingdom being on the same page did that. And then the exact same situation happened at an Estrella. After a really great day of warfighting. This is just 2 or 3 years after that. After a tournament or two, after whatever, Bella, he and I had this quiet, nobody else was there, epic pickup fight, where it was literally, we were both so exhausted that it took us a couple, like he hit me and I'm like, I'm dead. And he's like, oh man, that wasn't hard enough. I'm like, I know. And you know, but we both know that 3 hours ago that was good. So this is the game we're playing right now. And then I was able to get one in on him that was a touch. And he's like, yep, we're on the same page. And we just clicked. And we weren't fighting for anything other than just, I was fighting a fantastic fighter who was fighting me, not to beat me or count coup, but because he loved fighting. And we were able to have that kind of fight. And those are my two. And the first time I fought both those guys, and most memorable.
Super cool. That's cool. All right. And the bonus question is, who's the cleanest fighter in your kingdom?
Duke Kjartan. Always has been, always will be. I've watched that guy make good choices and the right decisions and agonize over borderline stuff. And he taught me how to do it right. He taught me how to do that. And he does not like getting hit. He doesn't like getting hit hard. He's going to take it. And yeah, and if I ever get the kind of respect from somebody about my gauging as I have for his gauging, I'd be good.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Your Grace, for joining us. Thank you, Bren, for co-hosting with me tonight. That was fun.
Yeah, thanks.
I really did it. I mean, we kept you here for 2 hours, which I feel really bad about. But thank you so much. It's been super entertaining and interesting and all of that. So
thank you guys.
And tomorrow, Bren and I are going to talk to Duke Morgan from North Shield. So that should be interesting too. He actually got his start in Ontario, which I did not know. But we're going to talk to him about that tomorrow. So, okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.